So good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Workforce Wednesday webinar. My name is Kirsten Bayer, and I'm with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University. Today's Workforce Wednesday webinar is Listening to Understand and Solution Creation, Tips for Active Listening and Problem Solving. I am actually your moderator and facilitator and presenter today, so I will be presenting today's information to you. Couple of housekeeping things before we get started. We are on the Zoom webinar platform, which is a little bit different than Zoom meeting in the fact that you as an attendee do not have the ability to unmute yourself or turn on your camera. And so I do encourage your participation. I'm going to have some chat participation questions today, as well as some different polls and interactions that way. You can always feel free to type in the chat or the Q&A if you have any questions or comments, and I'm happy to pause for those. Or you can feel free to raise your Zoom hand on the Zoom toolbar, and I'm happy to unmute you and we can have that dialogue. So I do encourage that dialogue, but this Zoom platform is just a little bit more presenter attendee as opposed to a discussion platform like Zoom meeting is. And we do have more seats on this platform, so that's why we have our Workforce Wednesday webinars on this platform. We will be doing some beginning polling here in just a minute, and we have closed captioning on today for accessibility reasons if you need it, or for note-taking purposes. We are recording today's webinar, and it will be posted on our Illinois Workforce Academy website. It will also be posted on Illinois WorkNet's website, so you can find it on either location, along with the presentation slides. And then we also have an activity today that we're going to be doing, and I will post that activity as well with the presentation slides following today's webinar. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for typing in the chat. So like I said, this is today's title of the webinar. So thank you for registering and joining me. Again, my name is Kirsten Bayer, and I am the Assistant Director of Communications at ICSPS. We are housed in the EAF department, or Educational Administration and Foundations Department, within the College of Education at Illinois State University in Bloomington-Normal. And I oversee communications and marketing initiatives on our workforce grants that we have through the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. I also hold a bachelor's degree in public relations and a master's degree in communications, both from Illinois State University. Go Redbirds if you're a fellow Redbird. And then I also teach on the side. I adjunct teach. I used to adjunct teach at Richland Community College if you're from Decatur, or if you're familiar with that. Oh yeah, Diana, go Redbirds. If you're familiar with that community college. And I also currently just moved to Peoria, Illinois, so I will be adjuncting this fall at Illinois Central College. Both colleges, I've taught intro to communication classes. I've taught interpersonal communication classes. Public speaking is more up my area of expertise. So I mostly teach public speaking classes for general education courses. I've taught media literacy and media communication courses as well. Throughout my years teaching, I've been teaching now for 6 years. So since 2018, I've been teaching alongside working full-time at ICSPS since 2020. So just a little bit about me and kind of my expertise as to how I'm able to give you this professional development session today. We'll get started with our beginning workforce polls that we do every Wednesday, and this is mostly for the WIO Professional Development Committee. Let me pull that up here. So I'll go ahead and launch that now. Oh, that was the wrong poll, excuse me. But we're going to do this one too, so it's fine. Which partner do you best represent today? So if you could answer that one for me. And then we'll go back to the location poll. But this is for the WIO Professional Development Committee. I sit on that committee with representation from all 4 core title partners. That committee's initiative is to plan the WIOA Summit or Illinois Workforce Summit is what it's going to be called this year, in the spring. And then we also are planning team for all of the Workforce Wednesday webinar professional development that you all have registered for today. So we do look at these polls just to make sure that we're hitting all of our partners across the state and representation from all of the titles. So I'll give everyone a couple more seconds because we have a few stragglers answering the poll. So I'm gonna just end that and share the results. It looks like we have a good spread across all of the titles, which is awesome. Welcome to Title 3, 4, 1, and 2 people, as well as other WIOA partners and stakeholders. So thank you for attending today's webinar. Appreciate your attendance. And then this one is the right one. So where is your location from today? Your local area, if you're from Chicago, Northern Illinois, Central, Southern, or statewide. We'll give everyone a couple seconds to answer this poll. Okay, those are still trickling in. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end that and share the results just so you all can kind of see. Looks like we're hitting a good span across the state, which is awesome. So thank you for participating in those polls. I know if you've ever been on a Workforce Wednesday webinar before, you're probably very familiar with those polls. So we're gonna jump right into content. Feel free to type in the chat if you, oh, Amy said I'm in Iowa, not represented on the poll, so I will represent on the chat. Awesome, Amy. Thank you for joining us from Iowa. Okay, so agenda today is that we're gonna learn a little bit. This is gonna be kind of a big picture type of session because we only have roughly an hour to an hour and a half with each other. We scheduled the webinar for 90 minutes, so we'll see where we get because we do have a lot of activities today and I want to have you all participate. So today's agenda is featuring types of listening. We're going to talk about the difference between active listeners and passive listeners, benefits to active listening in the workplace, the 3 A's of active listening, the art of listening in virtual teams, since a lot of our positions nowadays, especially within the state of Illinois, are in a hybrid format. And then we'll go through a listening activity, which is more for fun, but just also to test your own listening skills. And then talk about some action steps that you can take with you moving forward from today's session. So we're going to start off today with another poll. So do we spend more of our waking time writing, reading, talking, listening, or eating? So let me go ahead and pull that up. So there you go. You should be able to answer that now. So do you think we spend more of our waking time talking, listening, eating, reading, or writing? We'll give everyone a couple seconds to answer that poll. The answers are still trickling in, so a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end that and share the results. So most people said listening, probably because of the title of this presentation, I'm sure. But some people, they gave it a guess of talking, talking's a good guess. Eating, maybe you just feel like you spend most of your time eating because you love food, and I'm total foodie too, so I get that. A couple of writing and reading as well. Reading, I think, also is like a good answer because we're just constantly consuming media and messages, and so reading would be a good answer as well. So let's find out what the actual answer is. So it's kind of a trick question because we spend most of our waking time communicating, but out of all of the ways that we communicate, we spend most of our time listening. So those who answered listening would technically be correct. We acquire knowledge, we develop our language, we learn professions, enhance relationships, and communicate respect to others through listening. So people spend 70 to 80% of their day engaged in some form of communications, and about 55% of their time is devoted to specifically listening. So actually, we're going to do this as a poll. You can type in the chat if you want, but I have Zoom is fun now. It lets you do short answer polls. So I'm going to launch that and hopefully it works for all of you. You should be able to type your answer in there. So we'll give everyone a couple minutes to do this since it's kind of a longer question. But I just want to know, in your opinion, why is knowing how to listen effectively important in the workplace? So you can give a short answer or a long answer. I think I did like 500 words if you wanted to type something more in breadth, but we'll give everyone a couple minutes to go ahead and answer this. That way you can give it some thought. We have about 17 people who've answered, and we have 48 on the webinar with us, so we'll give it a couple more minutes. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end that so we can kind of share the results and go over it. Let's see. I think I need to reshare my whole desktop here so we can see the answers. Oh, wait, no, let me do this. Okay, so you should all be able to see the answers. Okay, so someone said, or Deborah said, to provide effective communication among the team, we don't want to misinterpret, to prevent miscommunication. It provides you with the necessary information to do your job effectively, interacting with coworkers efficiently and mindfully, to understand. We must know the true issue or point in order to act, for projects to go smoother and for work styles. You're able to understand how to solve a problem so we don't misinterpret information, tasks and roles being assigned, feeling like coworkers are being listened to if they need something. It also shows respect. I think respect is a huge one. To follow instructions helps you do your job better. We have a lot of following instructions. I'm going to skip here. These are all great answers, so thank you for participating. A lot of like clear, concise instructions, so there are no misunderstandings and misinterpreting. I like this one. Listening can help improve productivity and communication with others. Makes life easier for everyone. I would agree with that. Absolutely, yeah. So thank you for answering that question. Go back to the PowerPoint here. All right. Let me exit out of that. Okay. So, just another debrief. So active listening in the workplace. The reason why it's important and being able to effectively listen, it's because it promotes awareness and mindfulness and attention to detail, and it can also help improve working relationships, understand tasks, and grow both professionally and personally. Also, active listening is a transferable skill. I would consider it a soft skill in terms of professional skills that you can definitely add to your resume or skill set when you're interviewing for positions or talking about why you deserve a promotion, or just to advocate for yourself in a situation within the workplace, that you have the ability to active listen, and that is a real skill and something that you have worked really hard to develop. So there are three different kinds of listening that we are going to learn and focus on today. The first one is comprehensive or gaining knowledge. So there is a purpose. So you listening right now to this professional development session is comprehensive listening. You are listening to this session in order to gain some sort of knowledge. The second one is critical. This is where you're listening to evaluate or make judgments on what you're hearing. So you can be comprehensively listening, and then your listening can turn to critical listening pretty quickly. If you hear something that doesn't make sense to you, or if you are listening and you hear something that you disagree with or might need to pay attention to more, you begin to critically listen. And then the third one is empathetic listening, which is really your ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. So, for example, if someone tells you that their dog dies, or a family member is sick, or maybe a baby is born, you're able to listen to that news and then effectively empathize or show emotion, depending on what that news is. And I just really love this quote that I found where it says, listening is often the only thing needed to help someone. And I think we can bring that into the workplace in order to be effective, active listeners. Just knowing that maybe you can't do something for a coworker specifically outside of the workplace if they're going through a difficult season or a challenging time, whether it's about work or personal things, but maybe just listening to them is something that you can do to help. Next, we're going to learn about active listeners versus passive listeners. So passive listeners are like tape recorders. They record the words and they kind of miss the intent or underlying reason for the information. So if the speaker is providing a clear message, listeners will probably hear most of what's being said, but passive listeners, um, they are just recording what they're listening to. They're kind of missing the intent or the emotion behind what they're listening to, and they can get distracted easily. They are those people that when you're in a meeting with them, they're constantly looking at their cell phone, or they bring their laptops to the meeting and maybe they're taking notes, but maybe they're also checking their email, or they're going over a to-do list in their head. So they're typically trying to multitask and do do an activity that pulls their focus away from the actual speaker. So maybe that's you right now, listening to this professional development session, but also trying to multitask. We're all guilty of it, so I don't blame you necessarily, but just know that you are passively listening, not actively listening. And active listeners are people who engage with the speakers through either nonverbal cues, such as eye contact or nodding their head. They're able to restate or paraphrase exactly what they heard back to the speaker to confirm their understanding of the information. And the speaker acknowledges and listens to them as well for the cycle of new information to be introduced. So if you're an active listener, you're someone who's participating in the polls, participating in the chat today. You're going to ask questions. You're maybe taking notes during today's session to write down some good things that you're learning. And so you're actively focused and participating in the content that you are consuming. So, active listening, psychologists Carl Rogers and Richard Farson in 1957, in a paper titled Active Listening, first coined the term. So, they are who first coined the term active listening. And they wrote in their paper, active listening is an important way to bring about changes in people. They indicate how clinical and research and evidence clearly shows active listening as one of the most effective agents for individual personality change and also for group development, and also how active listening brings changes in people's attitudes toward themselves as well as others, shaping their basic values and personal philosophies. So next we're going to talk about benefits to active listening, specifically in the workplace, which I think we can all agree that a huge benefit to being able to actively listen to our coworkers and people in the workplace is building trust. It helps to build relationships. So when we actively listen, we can help establish trust, we can help establish rapport and effective communication among our coworkers. Typically, you and your employees or your coworkers are happy when you meet each other's respective goals. So, for example, for an employer, it is the organizational success. And for the employees, it's the tasks and objectives that they are assigned to complete. And so, therefore, it is very vital to have trust in each other for a healthy work experience. And we are aware of the fact to build trust in the workplace, we must be able to do the following, which includes active listening, being honest and supportive, being non-judgmental, to have those healthy communication practices. And to have all of these points be true within your workplace, you must have an understanding of each other as coworkers, employees, and employers. And to be able to do that, we need to be able to develop our active listening skills. This will help align your listening with your words and communication overall, which helps align your actions. So then when your words and when you are able to listen effectively and then communicate effectively back with your words to your coworkers and employees and employers, then you are able to back up your communication with your actions, which helps to build trust in the workplace. And there's absolutely nothing worse than working with people that you do not trust. It makes your work life very stressful, as I'm sure a lot of you can attest to. The next benefit to active listening in the workplace is also productivity, which I know a lot of you said that in the short answer response poll. Just being more productive is why active listening is important in the workplace. And you were correct. Active listening has countless benefits when it comes to employee productivity. When higher up management does not hear the employee's views or ideas, it can fuel resentment and lower productivity. Also, proper feedback and actively considering your employees' views and coworkers' views and ideas are vital for a healthy workplace and performance. And so, having said that, it's really important to ensure that internal communication is solid. And a part of that internal communication is being able to actively listen, right? Only then can we really develop a culture of mutual trust and understanding. And it's always a two-way process to be able to actively listen to one another. But when we are able to establish that healthy communication, we are able to increase our productivity. The third benefit to active listening in the workplace is that it helps resolve conflicts and reduces misunderstanding, which we had a ton of that answer in the chat. So I think you all are aware that it helps to reduce people having miscommunication or misinterpreting each other, just misunderstandings in general. So we all know that honestly, where we have people, we have problems. So we're all human and conflicts and mishaps are inevitable in any workplace. And the reasons for these can vary from maybe a minor misunderstanding to a major debacle in the workplace over a project, or maybe even just personality clashes. And so misunderstandings or different viewpoints, or maybe even a lack of recognition can often create conflicts in the workplace. I think a lack of recognition is a huge one when you feel underappreciated. And so I believe there's nothing in the workplace that communication and good communication, I should clarify, cannot resolve. So when I say good communication, I truly mean being able to actively listen to one another. Often we fail to understand everyone, even in our personal lives, and respect other people's views because we never really see things from their perspectives. It takes active work to be able to actively listen to another person and see yourself in their shoes, that empathetic listening that we learned about earlier, and be able to see it from their perspective. And so typically our sense of pride and self-righteousness kind of gets in the way here. And so if we are able to actively listen to our coworkers, it helps in recognizing other people's perspectives and feelings and helps us to appreciate them, which in turn is typically reciprocated. And this can help resolve conflicts and also help foster a culture of respect for our workplaces. Another huge benefit to active listening is that strong working relationship with our coworkers, which not only helps them, but also helps us just feel more satisfied at work, um, feel more comfortable, feel happier, feel more relaxed at work, which I think we all strive to have that. For me, I don't know about all of you, but it truly is who I work with that makes or breaks my experience in my day-to-day job. The people I work with truly make or break it. I love the work that I do, not every day, right? But most days. And I truly do enjoy it, but I wouldn't be able to enjoy it if I was working with people that I did not have a good, strong working relationship with. So it's really important to form those healthy working relationships in the workplace for that healthy work experience. And actually, a study conducted by Faye Dole in 2003 showed that there are two types of listening: listening to understand and listening to respond. And so I found this really interesting, even though it's in 2003, which was a while ago, right? Like what, 21 years ago now, which is wild to say. I'm a millennial, so 2003 feels like 3 years to me, 3 years ago to me. But people who listen to understand form better relationships and are more empathetic in their approach. And the same holds for work relationships. The more members in a workplace that follow this approach, the better work relationships they form. But listening to understand and listening to respond, I think, are truly two very different things. And I find myself doing this a lot. When I'm listening to someone, I'm automatically within the lap or within like 10 seconds thinking about how I'm going to respond to them or what I'm going to say. Or I want to make sure I say this. I don't want to forget to say this. I'm not just truly listening to understand them and digest what they're saying, and then taking a minute to pause and respond. And I think the reason we do this is because it's kind of seen as rude, right? Like we want the conversation to flow. But something that I've been trying to actively practice is truly forcing myself to listen to understand them and then responding with, I'm processing what you're saying and I'm thinking about how I want to respond because I wanted to make sure I was truly actively listening to you. And then that's my response to them. And then allowing that ample amount of time for me to conduct that response and then give it. I think we're constantly listening to respond and not listening to understand. And that is truly that listening to understand is what we need to be truly striving for. Okay, the next benefit to active listening in the workplace is self-empowerment, which I thought was really interesting, but it's so range true that when we are able to actively listen to others, I think it really does empower our own self. It helps you to build your confidence and kind of let go of your own like pride and your own agendas that you have. Because again, you're listening to understand, not listening to respond. And when you practice active listening and understand what is beneficial for you in the workplace, you kind of get to expand your perspective in the direction, which can feel very empowering. And you become more aware of your work environment and more aware of your coworkers and things that they're dealing with and things that are on their plate. And I think you're just able to be more empathetic and you can communicate with your coworkers and your peers and members of your organization with a lot more ease and confidence because you do feel self-empowered. So next we're going to talk about how are we going to implement this? How are we going to practice active listening? We've been talking about what's the difference between active listening and passive listening. That's great, Kirsten. We've been talking about why it's important in the workplace. Great. But how do I actually implement this? How do I actually do this in your day-to-day life, in your day-to-day conversations? How do you do this when you get off of this professional development session and go to your next meeting for the day? You have to be very intentional. You have to be intentional in anything you do in life, I think. But you have to be very intentional when trying to actively listen and just better communicate. And that takes effort, it takes time, it takes brain power. And I know some days are better than others for you to be able to implement this, but hopefully today is one of those days where you can do this and start to just practice being an active listener and just being mindful of it. So the first thing that we need to be mindful of is paying attention. And I know that that seems so simplistic, but especially nowadays, we're so distracted. Um, Constantly, I find myself watching TV while also scrolling on my phone at late at night. And that's just, I'm not listening to the TV. Like we think that our brains can multitask a lot more than they truly can. It's actually been proven that you cannot give 100% of your brain to multiple things at once. You're always splitting your attention if you are trying to multitask. So you're just not giving 100% to the two or three tasks that you're trying to do at one time. So if we can focus ourselves to pay attention by making eye contact and giving the speaker your full attention, and avoid the distraction of thinking about what you're going to say next, or avoid the distraction of getting on your phone, or turn off your email, like turn on your automatic replies for an hour if you really need to. I don't think anything within our workplaces is that dire. We're not surgeons, we're not doctors. No one's going to die if you step away from your workplace to attend a professional development session or to be really actively listening in a meeting for an hour or 30 minutes, right? So avoiding those distractions, making sure you're paying attention, use your body language to communicate that, to show that you're listening. And the speaker is likely reading your body language just as you should be reading theirs. So this is obviously when we're in person, right? Not when we're virtual, but even when you're virtual, if you have your cameras on, you can communicate that you're actively listening. Just make sure that your posture is open and inviting, and you can use facial expressions and like nodding to help them understand that you are listening. You can again seek to understand what the speaker is saying by reflecting on the information, paraphrase what you've heard, and ask questions to clarify any points that you may not fully understand. This is my favorite thing to do, that to show that I'm actively listening, is to kind of repeat back what the speaker said when I ask a question and saying, okay, I heard you say XYZ. Can you please clarify more about X? Or what did you mean by Y? Right. So I kind of repeat or repeat what they said back to them to be able to ask my questions and clarify the points that I need clarification on. Just remember that if you have a question, someone else in the group probably does. So it's good to speak up. It shows that you're actively listening. Try not to interrupt the speaker though. So hold any questions you have until the end. I always like to bring like a notepad or a notebook to meetings, and then I can write down my questions or comments. That way I don't forget them, right? And I can continue to actively listen. And then don't try to take perfect notes. I can be really bad about this because I am a perfectionist. So I don't know if any of you can relate to that. But just write down keywords or phrases and like kind of underline where you have those questions. And then you can take a moment later to wrap up your notes and fill in more details about what the speaker said. And then responding appropriately. So be honest, state your own opinions respectively. And I think that the speaker will be able to effectively know that you were actively listening during when they were speaking, which again just communicates that respect and helps develop those strong working relationships that we've been focusing on today. So next we're going to jump into the 3 A's of active listening. So the first A of active listening is attitude. Attitude, when I say attitude, I mean a feeling or emotion that comes from understanding that we must be respectful towards others while we're sharing information, and also understanding that we all learn something new from others, even if we have a strong belief or feelings prior to the topic, like we all have bring our own biases. When we have that good attitude and respect for the speaker, regardless of if we agree with them or not, we tend to be able to look beyond our preconceived notions and just become better listeners and better communicators. So, just having a good attitude and giving the speaker respect, regardless of if you agree with their opinions or not. I really loved this picture here where in quote by Bernard Baruch, which says most of the successful people I've known are the ones who do more listening than talking, which I think is very accurate. The second A of active listening is attention, which we've basically just talked about how we need to force ourselves to pay attention, which I think is a lot easier said than done nowadays. There's so many distractions, right? To be a good listener, we have to have good attention though. It's easier said than done, and many of us have less attention spans nowadays, or we tend to be very easily distracted. And so if that is you, which I self-identify as that, you must practice some exercises to help you hold your attention to the speaker. You can do mind games or puzzles that keep your attention. I like to do meditation, which if you've ever tried to meditate, it's extremely difficult. Um, and I think it's a really good tool to help retain your focus and your full attention. The worst part about meditation is when you get distracted, you have to start over. So if you force yourself to meditate for a minute, when you start to feel your mind wander off, you have to restart your minute. So it's a time-consuming practice, but it really does help you to gain better attention skills. And then I also liked this quote by Bryant McGill, which says, one of the most sincere forms of respect is actually listening to what another has to say. The last A of active listening is adjustment. And adjustment is listening. Oh, adjustment in listening, excuse me, is nothing but keeping an open mind. So just meaning that you're able to adjust when the speaker pivots, kind of being adaptable is another synonym for adjustment in terms of the three A's of active listening. I would also say adaptable to be able to follow what the speaker conveys, even if it's difficult for you to grasp or if it like holds not really a lot of meaning to you. I think often we listen to our bosses or coworkers or leaders speaking about business or life in general. And if the topic of discussion is kind of monotonous or steers in kind of a monotonous direction or maybe doesn't directly apply to you, you tend to kind of wander off, daydream, not continue to actively listen. But I think if you're able to keep an open mind and you force yourself to invest your time because you have dedicated that time to be in that meeting or listen to that speaker, then you will adapt to the situation. And in the end, you'll become a better listener, yes, but you might also learn something that you wouldn't have before. And I also loved this quote by Alan Alda, which says, listening is being able to be changed by the other person. So next I want to talk about the art of listening in virtual teams because I think it's truly an art to be able to work hybrid. Just how many, like raise of hands, raise your hand on your Zoom toolbar if you work hybrid or even remote, like fully remote. We work hybrid in our office. So yeah, lots of people are raising their hands. Okay. Yeah, so it looks about like 14 of you raised your hands. So you can lower them if you need to now. Thank you for participating. It shows me you're actively listening, right? Um, Zoom is cool because it has so many features where you can make sure that your audience is actively listening even when you don't have your cameras on. Um, and I think other platforms are doing this too. I know for some of our conferences, if you've been to the WeOA Summit or if you've been to the Forum for Excellence, we use an app called Huva for those conferences, and they're really great about having like interaction tools for virtual networking and communication. But when you're working from home remotely, whether you're hybrid or fully remote, We might not always have those interaction tools. I mean, a lot of people I think use Teams, Microsoft Teams. That's what our team uses, Microsoft Teams, or maybe other software where you can have those virtual interactions without jumping on a call. Yeah, one, you said I like the Teams app. I do too, because I like how you can do like emojis and stuff. Um, which, helps with communication, but some teams, if you work for the state, maybe you're not up to date with that kind of technology yet. I know at the state level, it's definitely harder. You guys have a lack of technology. But I just want to focus on maybe some things about listening in virtual teams that we can do and kind of be mindful of. So noisy listening doesn't work on video calls. And so what do I mean by noisy listening? Surely listening is quiet, right? Doesn't the speaker talk and the listener just shuts up and just is quiet? Well, actually, no. So, noisy listening, people who have developed excellent face-to-face listening skills have learned to use small, encouraging noises like or or yes. Some people will say yes, yes, or to keep the other person talking. And these noises tell the speaker that the listener is still with them and is actively listening. So they work really great in face-to-face conversations, but they're actually a really terrible tactic in a video conference or on a Zoom because the software tracks the noises from all participants and moves the camera and audio to pick up that person who's making the most obvious sound. And it's also just really distracting. So a great listener virtually who regularly deploys those kind of and things like that techniques in a face-to-face situation will find themselves being disruptive in the flow of a phone call or a video call and cause the speaker's words to be lost, having precisely the opposite effect to the one that they actually want to have. And so, as a good listener on a virtual call or, Zoom meeting or WebEx meeting or whatever, what should you do? You happily, there's another great technique that works, and it's just having your camera on and smiling and very gently nodding works well on video. If you're already someone who works hard at encouraging others, then you just need to remember to do this nonverbal when you're using your video. Again, if you don't want to use your video, like I know you all can't turn on your video cameras today, so that's kind of why I have mine off too. Using those things like emojis to show those reactions, typing in the chat can help just let your speaker know that you are actively listening to them, but we don't want to be noisy listeners. Another one is agape is better than a blank face. So, if you're not consciously aware of sending out positive vibes when listening to others, then the chances are that on a video conference, you may be at risk of showing what we might call a blank face if you do have your camera on. So, if you've ever noticed this in a face-to-face meeting, a speaker will often gravitate to keep talking to one particular person. Especially if it's like a presentation, you'll find that the speaker like consistently looks at one particular person, and in that person's direction. And most of the time that's because either they're talking to a boss or maybe a potential client, but sometimes it's because there's no power element, or there's a power element of the speaker because they're probably focusing on the people who are radiating encouragement. They're nodding slightly, they're smiling, they're looking attentive, they're taking notes. And the speaker can see that kind of validation by talking to these people and not to the people who are just neutral or kind of absent of interest. I know, like when I'm presenting, I don't typically look at the people who are clearly checking their email, clearly on their phone, clearly just not paying attention to me, right? Like we can tell. It's pretty obvious. I mean, me as a teacher, I get that all the time when I'm teaching. It's pretty obvious to me when my students aren't paying attention to me. And even when I'm presenting PD sessions in person or on a video call where we have our cameras on, it's pretty obvious who's multitasking. And so on a video conference, the issue of having that blank face can be more pronounced from the speaker's perspective because there is a lack of the listener's ability to have those nonverbal cues. And there's a chance to feel, there's not really a chance to feel how interested the team or audience is because we can only see you like from your shoulders up, right? So as a listener in a virtual setting who's interested in promoting those excellent team dynamics, it's your job to radiate positive sentiment while listening. If you're of a classical inclination, you can look up the 6 words the Greeks used for different forms of love, which means to try to feel agape. Agape means love in the Greek sense or Greek language. And so the general sense of love for everybody. And so in any case, basically you can make an effort to relax and soften your face and just have like feel good thoughts about this person or team. And I think that we can communicate that even through video. Again, like nodding your head, smiling. I think we as speakers on a virtual setting notice that. Notice those nonverbals, just basically focusing on not just your body language when you're virtual, but mostly your facial expressions. And then the last art of actively listening in a virtual team is pick a strategy to stay focused. Looks like some of you still have your hand raised. Were you raising your hand because you work hybrid, or did you guys have questions? I just want to pause if you have a question. So go ahead and lower your hands if you don't have a question, if you know how to do that. Okay. If you have a question, just type in the chat that you have a question because I don't want to unmute you guys if you just don't need to have your hands raised. Okay. So my last art of active listening in a virtual team session is to pick a strategy to stay focused. So for a person who actively wants to listen well, I would say the first step is to give up this foolish idea that we all have. And I'm guilty of it too, 100%. But I will 100% agree and die on a hill saying that it's pretty foolish of us all to think that we can maintain our concentration levels while we're multitasking. Like it's just not feasible. So if we can even just put our phone aside, it's not going to necessarily stop your mind from losing focus and drifting off and missing much of what is being said, but it just helps you to not be distracted. I think our phones are our biggest distraction when we're communicating, right? In her paper, How to Monitor Listening More Efficiently, Metacognitive Strategies in Listening, Margaret Imhoff points to 3 key strategies that people can use to improve the quality of their listening. And the first one is interest monitoring. And so interest monitoring would be a great strategy to pick to stay focused. The listeners monitor their level of focus and interest in the topic, and they make an effort to re-engage when they feel themselves drifting. So it's similar to like meditation and the fact that when you feel yourself drifting, your thoughts drifting, you refocus back to the meditation. And so it's similar manner, interest monitoring. You try to be actively aware when you feel yourself start to drift off of focus, and then you kind of realign to get back on focus. So it's a mental processing strategy. The next strategy that you could choose from Margaret is asking pre-questions. So I think this is a really good strategy. The listener can ask themselves questions before the conversation or before the meeting or before the webinar to identify some things that you might want to learn during that session or that you might want to know from the conversation. So you can do this during the conversation to reconnect. You can ask questions, or you can even do them prior to the meeting. I like to do it during meetings because typically I'm walking into a meeting like knowing what I want to get out of it. So even just writing like a couple quick bullet points, this is what I want to get out of this meeting, or I want to make sure I ask this question at the end of the meeting, or I want these things to be answered during this meeting, helps me to focus on my active listening because these questions create a goal for me. And they set goals for the discussion and like what I want to get out of it. And the last strategy that Margaret talks about is elaborative techniques. So these require the listener to work with the material that they hear cognitively, and it might involve critiquing or analyzing your information or even synthesizing it. And so the active listening strategy of summarizing what the person has said and then feeding it back to them in fewer words is an example of an elaborative technique. So you would actively listen and then be able to summarize what that person has said and feed it back to them in fewer words. Maybe you don't outrightly do this, but just being able to do it like after a meeting, I think is a true testament to you being able to actively listen. And you can definitely still use this in a virtual team setting on a multi-person call. You can use it as well. So some pre-questions, going back to pre-questions, because I just wanted to give you some examples. These can be relatively easy strategy to adopt. I think it's the easiest one. Just taking some time before the call to think about a range of things that you'd like to find out from the call. And then if you find yourself losing focus, bring yourself back to those questions. Like, for example, what is known or unknown here? What else do we need to know? What would have to change here to change our decision? What would I have to do to make this happen? Those kind of questions, they can be pretty vague. Of course, if you're listening well, then asking one or two pertinent questions on a call is also a great way of showing that speaker that you're actively listening, right? Maria says in the chat, a smile helps to relax everyone. Absolutely. I would completely agree with that. So, last thing for today, before we go over just some resources for you all to be able to take after this session, is just to do a quick activity. This is kind of for fun, but also to test your own active listening skills. If you're curious, like you might be thinking, I really try hard to actively listen. Am I a good active listener? And so this is just a listening activity that I actually do with my students, but it's always funny for me to see them recognize, if they are a good listener or not. And this is just one test, right? But if you would like to participate, I would love for you to. So you can type your answers in the chat, but the first thing that I want you to do is just eliminate your distractions, close your eyes, maybe if that helps you, and just listen. Don't take any notes. I'm trusting you all because I can't see you, right? Don't take any notes. Don't write anything down or anything like that. Just close your eyes and just try to actively listen to the details of this story. Okay. So don't type any answers or anything in the chat quite yet. So the activity is that I'm going to read this story about the woman in the accident, and I want you to listen closely. And then I'm going to read a list of questions about what you just heard and then give you some time to respond. Okay. So here we go. A 72-year-old woman was standing at the corner of 17th and Grand on Tuesday, August 15th, 1978. As the woman began to cross 17th, a man driving a dark blue convertible applied his brakes and slid several yards. When the police arrived at the scene of the accident, the driver was standing next to a yellow car that had stopped at the scene. The driver of the blue car was questioned for 15 minutes and taken to the police station. The car sustained $2,000 worth of damage. Other damages to the driver included a fractured right leg, broken storefront window, and many cuts and bruises. The policemen who reported to the scene said that the man was given a $25 fine for not yielding the right of way to a pedestrian. The woman was taken to Memorial Hospital in Los Angeles and released. Okay, that is the end of the story. So here are the questions to determine if you are a good listener or not. So the first question is, and you can just type in the chat, what was the woman's age? Okay, everyone's saying 72. That is correct. Where did the woman live? A lot of people are saying Los Angeles. This was actually a trick question. If you were listening very intently, it never said where the woman lived. It did say that the accident happened in Los Angeles, but it never said where she lived at. So those of you who are saying didn't say or not sure or question mark, you are correct. Uh, what color was the man's car? Blue. A lot of people are saying blue. Technically, it was dark blue, but yes, the man's car was blue. How many police officers investigated the accident? People are saying they don't know, unknown, it didn't say, or one. Technically, they did not say, but the story did say policemen, not policeman, so it's plural. So we could infer that it was more than one, but it technically did not say, so it was unknown. The next question is, what color was the car that the man stood next to? Yellow. Yes, everyone's saying yellow. Good. How much damage was done to the car? $2,000. Somebody said 1,500. No, it's 2,000. That's correct. Yeah, we tend to remember monetary values for sure. Can anyone know, or does anyone catch where did the accident occur at? A lot of people are saying 17th and Grand. Yeah, so that is correct. 17th and Grand. Okay. Next question was, anyone cited for the traffic violation? If so, who was cited and how much? The man, yes, the driver of the blue car, the man, $25. That is correct. So it technically was the driver of the convertible, which was the man, and it was for $25. Correct. Yes. And then almost done. The next question is, when did the accident occur? Anybody catch the date? It was at the very beginning. Sometime in August. Yes. August 15th, 1978. So a lot of you are getting like the month or the year, or you'll get like the day and the month. So it was August 15th, 1978. And it even said Tuesday too. So Tuesday, August 15th, 1978. You want to be really specific. So if you got like a part of that, I would count that correct. And then two more questions. How long was the man questioned for by the police? 15 minutes. Yes, that's correct. For those of you putting that in the chat. And then the last question is, what hospital was the woman taken to? Los Angeles, Memorial. Some people said they don't know. That's okay. So technically Memorial Hospital, but it was in Los Angeles. So if you got like LA Hospital, I would count that. Yeah. Memorial Hospital, Los Angeles Hospital. Yeah. Okay. So hopefully you kind of graded yourself a little bit. So that was um 14 questions or 13 questions that I asked you. So if you got all 13 right, if you got 11 to 13 right, you are considered an excellent listener. So if that's you, you can give yourself a big pat on the back. That's your prize. Um, if you got nine, or if you got 8 to 10 right, then you're considered a good listener. 8 to 10 is a good listener. If you got 5 to 7 right, you're considered a fair listener. And if you got less than 5 right, you are considered a poor listener. So just a fun little game and activity to play today, just to test your active listening skills, because the story was, didn't really mean anything, but it had a lot of details in it, right? Like the date was a very specific detail, the age of the woman, the colors of the cars, the amount of the fines, the damage to the cars, the name of the hospital, very specific details, right? So just a good listening activity to force yourself to really active listen and just kind of test your listening skills. So I always like that. I do it with my students as well, just to test their active listening skills. And they always get super frustrated when they get the answers wrong, or if there's a question where I trick them and it's an unknown, like the story didn't say it, then they always get upset about that, which is kind of funny. So hopefully you all didn't get too upset. Okay, so moving on to action steps. So, what are some action steps that you're going to take with you today after this professional development session? What will you do after this presentation to improve your active listening skills? So, if you want to go ahead and type in the chat, or you can even raise your hand, I'm happy to unmute you if you want to share verbally. But what is something that you will do after this presentation to improve your active listening skills? Maybe something you learned today, or maybe it's something that you've just been wanting to be more cognizant of. What do you think you're going to do after this presentation to help improve your active listening skills? Rocio or Rokio, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, so I apologize. Try to avoid distractions. Good. Cassia, focus even more on listening. I know it's so funny because it's like, obviously we know how to listen, but if you've ever, I always use the example, like if you've ever heard anyone say like, you're hearing what I'm saying, but you're not actually listening to me, right? Like you can hear someone talking, but maybe you're not actually listening to them. So I think listening is like a true skill. Um, Beth says practice, remove distractions. Kristen says, I'm going to stop my email alerts when I go into meetings. I think that's a really good like thing to do, Kristen. Um, Lucas says meditate. Lucas, there's some really cool meditation apps. Be more intentional when listening to others, Desiree says. Um, Peter says pay more attention. Nellie says become a better listener. Try to avoid listening to reply. That's so hard to do, Valerie. But definitely I think it's a good like skill to try to attain, right? Stop formulating a response before the speaker is finished. Ease up on taking notes and just use keywords. I think it's hard to do that, Deborah, because we like don't want to miss anything, right? But especially during a virtual session nowadays, everything's recorded. So really you don't need to be very specific in your notes. And also I think if you're truly actively listening, you're going to remember a lot more than you give yourself credit for. So you don't really need to be taking that many notes. I will work on increasing my attention and avoid distractions. I think a lot of people are putting avoid phone distractions, which we know we're all guilty of, right? Not interrupting, Diana says. I'm terrible at that, Diana. If you ask my husband, he will tell you that's like my worst trait. I always interrupt people and I think I know what they're gonna say next. It's terrible that I do that. I try to be cognizant of it though. Deborah says, what everyone said above. Yeah, great way to hop on the train, Deborah. Nothing wrong with that. Holly says, don't blurt out my reply, slow down and focus on the comprehension and then reply. Minimize distractions as well. Lisa says, ditto to all. Love that. I will focus on listening and avoiding distractions. Great. Thank you all. Okay. So I think, are there ways that you can become a better critical, empathetic, or comprehensive listener by utilizing some of the tools we learned today? We don't need to type that in the chat. But I think you can just think about that. Like, are there better ways that you can become a more critical listener, right? Learning for uh, like critiquing while you're listening and being able to digest that information, form your own opinions. Are there ways that you can be a more empathetic listener, especially to your coworkers? I think a really good practice that we can do is always assuming good intent. Like when we're empathetically listening to other people, I don't know why as humans we do this, but we always assume ill intention or bad intention. I don't know. We just think everyone's out to get us or just has it out for us, which I'm not saying that people don't have bad intentions. Sometimes they absolutely do. But I think just assuming good intentions right off the bat is just a good best practice, and it can help you be a better empathetic listener. And then comprehensive listening too. Like, are there ways that you can, or tools that maybe you learned today that you can help you better listen when you're trying to expand your knowledge or gain that knowledge, which I think is most of the listening that we do in the workplace, right? But there's a lot of empathetic listening as well to like our coworkers and those personal conversations, which are important for workplace culture. Okay, so here's some resources that you all can take with you. Some articles, some of these articles that I read, like some of the statistics and stuff today are from some of these articles. And these are the articles that I kind of read to help curate this presentation for you all today. And so check those out. The Coaching Habit, David Hinzel is really, really good if you're interested in him. And then the podcast, I love listening to podcasts. Like one of my favorite things to do is to, when I'm working remotely, is to like take a walk, especially if I'm like hit a brain fog, usually right around that like 3 p.m. I'll turn on a podcast and just take a walk. I have 3 dogs, so I'll walk them for like, 20 minutes and listen to a podcast while I'm walking them. And I try to make sure it's always like work related, workforce related podcasts. There's some really cool ones out there. My coworker, Sarah Blaylock, if you know her, she's obsessed with podcasts. So she could probably recommend a lot of good ones too. But one that's really good about listening is called Listen Notes. And it's actually a podcast search engine that you can click on. And this presentation will be linked for all of you. So it's linked. You can click on it. And it has a huge collection of podcasts on like a wide range of topics that are typically about like professional soft skills, communication, listening. Um, and it's just a great source of materials for yourself or maybe like your team, and they can be easily downloaded onto your mobile device. Um, and like they're on Apple, they're on Spotify, etc. And then the site also provides like an embed code for each episode of the podcast. So if you wanted to like send it out to your team or use it in one of your slide decks or like connect it for your students, if we have like adult ed people on here, you can do that. I thought that was cool. And then there's some training tools like lessons on listening. And the one that I wanted to really highlight is this Accent Rosie. It's an app for anyone who uses Facebook, which is kind of cool. It's simple and it works with Facebook Messenger to send other people really short audio clips. So I like to use it with like my students. I don't have my students on Facebook, but I'll use like Facebook Messenger to send like record a quick audio clip. And then the students have to listen to the audio clip and write down what they hear. So like I'll play the audio clip in class physically. And then they have to write down what they hear. And it's pretty short. And then they can send their message back. So, and get instant feedback on how much they got correct. So it's a really great way for anyone really. Like you can do it with your family or friends. For you all to regularly work on developing your listening skills because it sends you a really quick audio clip. You listen to it and then you basically try to repeat what it says. And you can speed up the speed of the way it talks and the rate of what it's saying and things like that. So I just thought it was cool. It's cool to see how far technology's come and how we can implement it into our workplace. And then there's some other articles and things as well that I've linked for all of you. So again, you'll get this presentation following today's session. So that is all the content I have for today. Hopefully it was interactive and didn't bore anyone to death. And feel free to ask any questions. You can raise your hand and I'm happy to unmute you, or you can type in the chat. A couple of you still have your hand raised, but I don't know if it's from earlier or if you have a question. So Diana, if you have a question, or Jacqueline Mulak, or Deborah Davis, or Tiffany Rayford, or Lisa Jones, you all have your hands raised. So, okay. Okay, there we go. So Tiffany, Deborah, and Jacqueline, You guys have your hands raised, so if you have a question, I'll allow you to talk. Tiffany, if you have a question or a comment, you can talk now. Or Deborah, if you have a question or a comment, you can talk now. Oh, you just took your hand down, Deborah. No worries. Okay. Everyone's saying thanks. I definitely picked up some useful tips. This was a great webinar. Thank you. Good stuff. Great presentation. Thank you all so much for your feedback. I appreciate it. 10% happier app. Dan Harris. Okay, I'll have to check that out, Lucas. Very cool. Thank you all so much. Just a couple of closing housekeeping things. So you will receive a follow-up survey in your email tomorrow that you can take. We owe a professional development committee. I'm the person that sits on that along with my colleague Antonio, and we compile the data from the follow-up surveys to help us plan future professional development. So we do encourage you to take that. It's about 10 questions, shouldn't take you very long at all. Just helps us to get ideas for future PD as well as just some feedback on the presentation today. And if you enjoyed it, and if you learned something from it. So we always like to get that feedback. So we appreciate you taking that. It'll be a URL that will be in your email, follow-up email tomorrow. And then in the follow-up email will also be the URL where you can find the recording from today, as well as the presentation slides and the activity. So you can download that. And if you have any follow-up questions or really just need anything or want to chat, you can feel free to email me. I just put my email in the chat for all of you. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And have a great rest of your Wednesday. I'll stay on for just a little bit longer if anyone has any questions, but feel free to log off. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, guys. Thank you.